My God, why don't they laugh anymore? William's strangled cry echoed through the cold mansion in Seattle. Since the day he lost his wife, his 3 deaf-born triplets had known only silence. Dinners were mere rituals, their eyes empty. A millionaire to the world outside. But inside this house, he was powerless, isolated, a stranger to his own blood. Until Aaliyah, the young housekeeper, stepped in, turning pots and spoons into instruments, sparking the first laughter in the middle of a storm. But what if that moment was only the beginning? Join us as we uncover how healing can come from the most unexpected places. Aaliyah had been in the Carter mansion for nearly 3 weeks, long enough to recognize the suffocating rhythm of silence that filled every room. It wasn't peace, but a heavy, sealed silence, as though the walls themselves had learned how to swallow sound. The triplets rarely looked her in the eye, rarely showed any clear reaction. They drifted quietly through the living room, the hallways, the wooden stairs, like small shadows trapped in a private world no one could enter. William, the millionaire father, was no different. He moved like another shadow, gliding neatly from his office to his bedroom, pausing only to deliver short commands, precise as if read from a secretary's notes. He didn't make noise, but his silence weighed the house down even more. For Alia, who had grown up in a home alive with laughter, music, even loud but honest arguments, this atmosphere was an invisible punishment. Every time she prepared a meal, frustration welled up inside her, as though she were betraying her own memories of a noisy, warm home. That morning, Seattle rain poured against the windows, drops tapping like a natural drumbeat. In the kitchen, 2 of the triplets sat quietly at the small wooden table, eyes downcast, spoons scraping plates with barely a sound. The 3rd had pulled a chair to the window, staring out at the rain as if searching for another world beyond. The sight tightened Aaliyah's chest. She knew that if she did nothing, this meal would pass like dozens before it, cold, lifeless. She reached into her bag, fingers brushing against something familiar, the small black speaker she always carried. To her, music wasn't just entertainment, it was breath, a language she used when words failed. A flicker of hesitation passed through her. She knew William might not approve, but her heart urged, try. With a single press, a melody filled the air, warm, soulful, alive. Not classical, not the gentle background tunes of a luxury mansion, but an Aretha Franklin song, soul music rich with emotion, every drumbeat pronounced. The sound bounced off the table, seeped into the wooden floor, and reached the children's bare feet. Noah looked up first, eyebrows furrowed as if asking, "What just touched me?" Ethan blinked, then began to tap his heel against the floor. The youngest, Morgan, placed his hand on the table, fingers trembling before finding the beat. Aaliyah held her breath, heart pounding. It was the first real response she had seen from them since arriving. She quickly set the speaker on the counter, letting the sound expand through the room. Then she swayed her hips, rolled her shoulders with the rhythm, exaggerating her moves to seem playful, silly. No words escaped her lips, but her body spoke instead. Music is a game, try it. At first, the children's movements were clumsy, hesitant, as though afraid to make a mistake. Then something small broke through. Ethan let out a giggle, light and fragile as a raindrop hitting glass. Instantly, Morgan followed with a faint but real smile. Noah was more cautious, but at last his lips pressed together, the corner of his mouth tugging upward. To Aaliyah, it felt as if the whole kitchen had lit up. No one said a word, yet the room overflowed with a language stronger than speech, laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to tear through the heavy curtain of silence that had smothered the house for too long. And for Aaliyah, it was the beginning of a song that had never been played before. Would this fragile moment flash and vanish like lightning in a storm, or become the first beat in a long journey of healing? And before we continue with the heart of the story, don't forget to hit subscribe and give this video a like. Oh, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. The morning after the storm, the Carter mansion seemed to awaken. Pale sunlight streamed through rain-streaked windows, falling across the wooden floor like fragile beams. In the kitchen, instead of the usual silence, the space now echoed with scattered laughter, punctuated by playful rhythms. Aaliyah stood in the center of the room, holding a freshly washed white towel. She folded it, but instead of her usual neat flat creases, she bent and angled the cloth, and with just a few moves it transformed into a giant fabric bird. She placed it on the table, eyes sparkling with mischief. The triplets sat around it, their curious stares drawn in. One reached out, tiny fingers trembling, then burst into giggles when the bird flapped and tumbled to the floor. Not stopping there, Aaliyah picked up a t-shirt and folded it into a frog. This time she pressed lightly, and the frog hopped across the table. Morgan, the youngest, broke out in clear, ringing laughter that left Aaliyah stunned, as though she had just discovered the key to unlocking their silence. In the corner, Aaliyah lifted a clear dish soap bottle. She dipped a small loop, then blew. Soap bubbles floated out, shimmering in the dim light, drifting like tiny planets. Ethan reached out to chase them, eyes wide with wonder as one burst against his fingertip. Noah was more cautious, trying to balance a bubble on his palm, only to laugh when it popped. For the first time in years, all three children laughed together, a fragile but dazzling chorus. William, standing in the doorway like a shadow, witnessed it all. His brows furrowed not in anger, but in confusion. He had grown used to his children's silence, used to watching them sit through sterile therapy sessions without response. Yet here they were, alive with joy from games that seemed meaningless. Doubt stirred within him. Was this just a fleeting moment or something truly significant? Out on the porch, Aaliyah carried the momentum. She grabbed a broom and tapped out a beat on the steps. Each knock echoed, bouncing off the walls, mingling with the chirping birds outside. The children joined in, banging wooden spoons in rhythm chaotic at first, then slowly sinking to the tempo. The scene was both funny and heartwarming. Little musicians conducting an impromptu symphony inside a house once frozen in silence. A comical moment struck when Morgan, too eager, dropped the broom. It bounced back, nearly toppling an expensive potted plant. William tensed, heart lurching, but Aaliyah caught it smoothly, laughing as though it were all part of the game. The children laughed even harder, treating the mishap as a bonus act. William faltered, unsure whether to laugh with them or scold out of fear. That atmosphere made him step back. For years, he believed his children needed strict control, expensive classes, proven therapies. Yet now, as he watched them laugh until their sides hurt over bubbles and broom beats, he began to doubt everything he thought he knew. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long streaks across the wet patio. The triplets chased bubbles, their small feet splashing over rain-damp tiles, leaving imprints behind. Aaliyah stood among them, her gentle smile framed by hair tossed in the breeze. The image was like a living painting, something William never thought he would witness in his own home. But one question echoed in his mind. Could this laughter endure, or would it vanish like the soap bubbles drifting away in the yard? The kitchen had just come through a day full of play. Bubbles bursting, towels turned into birds, brooms into drumsticks. Now the three children lay sprawled across the living room rug, chests rising and falling after long fits of laughter. Aaliyah stood in the corner, wiping sweat from her forehead, her eyes alight as if she had just uncovered a great secret. High on the wall, the portrait of Emily Carter Williams' late wife hung in silence. Her gentle face in the frame had long been forgotten, reduced to decoration. For years it sat there, too high for the children to reach, too far for them to truly see. In that moment, Aaliyah felt something sharp stir inside her. She walked over, slowly lifting the frame from its hook. William wasn't there. He was upstairs in his office. The storm still rumbled faintly outside, but the house was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Kneeling down, she placed the portrait at the children's eye level. At first, they only glanced at it, as if it's something strange. Then the eldest's gaze lingered, pupils widening, as though some buried memory had been stirred. Little Morgan stepped closer, gently touched the face in the picture. His tiny finger trembled, tracing the soft features of the mother they had lost. No sound was made, but the room seemed to shiver. Then, suddenly, Ethan raised his hand. His small fingers drew a simple sign in the air, the letter M, in sign language. The motion was clumsy, trembling. Noah's eyes lit up as he watched, then lifted his own hand, repeating the gesture, carrying it forward. 3 small hands moved slowly but firmly, spelling out one word: Mother. No sound was needed. The message rang louder than speech. Aaliyah held her breath, throat tightening. She had never taught them this sign. Perhaps they had glimpsed it once in therapy, or in a forgotten book. But here, before their mother's face, this was the moment they chose to call her. A call born not of voice, but of memory and love. The laughter from the morning's games faded, replaced by a hush that felt sacred. No one moved. Only the glow of sunset lit their faces, as the portrait became the center of an impromptu ritual. On the stairs, William stopped mid-step. He sensed something, not sound, but a vibration in the air. Coming down, he saw a sight that wrenched his heart: his 3 children raising their hands, signing mother to Emily's portrait. A simple image, yet so powerful, as though his wife's spirit was present in the room. He was stunned. For years he had kept the photo high above, believing distance would dull the pain, believing it would spare the children from grief. But in truth, that distance had severed the only thread connecting them. Watching those trembling hands form the sign, he felt the invisible wall inside him begin to crack. Then, a moment of humor slipped in. Morgan, too eager, fumbled the sign, his fingers crossing into a strange shape. Ethan laughed. Noah joined in, and then all 3 corrected themselves, solemnly signing mother again, as if understanding the weight of their act. Their laughter mingled with Aaliyah's quiet tears, and with the lump rising in William's throat. The portrait remained, but it was no longer an object. It had become a bridge, carrying their mother back to her children, if only for a fleeting moment. William stood frozen, not daring to interrupt. He felt like an outsider in his own home, but for the first time, he realized that healing could begin with the smallest things: a sign, a glance, a lowered photograph. Was this only a fleeting instant, or the first step for the children to reclaim the voice of family? All right then, my dear audience, if you're watching and find this story moving, drop a 1 in the comments or write, "I'm still here," to keep listening. The children's laughter from that afternoon in the living room still lingered like the echo of a small ceremony. William stood frozen on the stairs, eyes red, heart tangled in emotion. But that fragile peace was quickly tested. 2 days later, a luxury car stopped at the gate. The specialist the Dr. William trusted above all stepped in, crisp white coat, hard leather case, stern demeanor. He was no stranger to the house, but he rarely saw the children so animated. They ran around the yard, their hands still practicing the clumsy signs Aaliyah had sparked. Aaliyah stood by the door, her heart lifting with hope. She thought this was her chance to prove it, to let an expert witness the change, to show that laughter had returned. William also carried a quiet hope, though the caution in his eyes never faded. The evaluation took place in the living room, beneath Emily's portrait now lowered to the children's eye level. Aaliyah sat at the back, hands clasped tight. The doctor watched the triplets, carefully laying out a few tests: shapes, pictures, basic signs. At first, Noah and Ethan followed, hesitant but responsive. Morgan laughed at his shadow on the paper, then signed the wrong letter, sending his brothers into quiet giggles. That moment made Aaliyah want to cry out in joy. She believed it was proof they were opening up, but the doctor only nodded slightly, his eyes unmoved. When it ended, he stacked his papers and turned to William, voice flat, as though reading a financial report. These improvements were only temporary, spontaneous. No scientific basis suggested they would last. The room froze. William, whose heart had only just begun to tremble open, recoiled instantly. He turned toward Aaliyah. In his eyes, anger and fear tangled into one. He had begun to believe in those playful moments, but now the doctor's words sliced through like a cold blade. Aaliyah tried to speak, but she was too late. William stepped forward, his voice clipped, restrained, each word like a hammer striking. She was planting false hopes. Every syllable landed heavy. The children, too young to grasp the meaning, nonetheless felt the tension. They fell silent. Their smiles faded. The scene that had been alive only minutes before was now coated in a thin layer of ice. Aaliyah's chest tightened. She didn't cry, didn't plead, she only stood still, her hands still carrying the faint scent of soap from the bubble games. In a few short minutes, everything seemed to collapse. William turned and strode quickly up the stairs. His shoes echoed, sharp and final, leaving behind a house sinking back into its familiar silence. The triplets, who had just begun to taste joy, slipped again into emptiness. One of them lifted a hand to sign mother, but stopped halfway, letting it drop, as though even belief itself had been extinguished. Aaliyah sat beside them, forcing a smile, though the light in her eyes had dimmed. She knew William's fear of hope, only to lose it again. Yet inside her another kind of faith smoldered, that the children's happiness could never be defined solely by a medical report. Outside, rain began to fall once more, its rhythm drumming against the roof. Aaliyah listened, her heart asking, could this rain song still be strong enough to draw the house out of doubt's shadow? Or was this the final period on a miracle that had only just begun? That night, the Carter mansion lay draped in a heavy calm. The rain had stopped, leaving only dampness clinging to the window frames, drops falling in slow ticks. A dim, golden light spilled from the living room, the only glow breaking through a house too accustomed to darkness. William descended the stairs slowly, as though carrying a stone lodged in his chest. The doctor had left hours ago, his cold report extinguishing every flicker of hope. Since then, the house had fallen back into silence. The children were mute once more, laughter gone, and Aaliyah had no games left to rescue the air. William felt like the culprit, the one who had snuffed out the light that had barely begun to shine. In his hand was an old envelope, its edges worn soft from being held too many times. Inside was a letter he had once written to Emily, his late wife, but never sent. For years he had hidden it in his desk drawer, as though it were a sin he dared not confess. Tonight, without knowing why, his trembling hands pulled it out, as if even he needed someone else to read it, just to remind him he was still human. The living room sat in silence. Aaliyah was on the sofa, her back resting against the cushions, eyes staring far off toward Emily's portrait now lowered on the wooden cabinet. She couldn't sleep either. When William entered, his heavy footsteps made her turn. In the dim light, his face looked composed, but his eyes carried a storm. Without explanation, William held out the letter. Aaliyah took it, her slender hands trembling in surprise. She opened the envelope and drew out the yellowed paper. The handwriting was uneven but steeped in emotion. She read silently. Emily, I'm sorry. I've failed. I can build the tallest towers, bring in billions of dollars. But when I see the children sitting in silence, I see only a powerless father. I don't know how to speak to them, don't know how to make them see me as their shelter. I'm afraid. Afraid I've lost everything, not just you, but them as well. The words pierced Aaliyah like cold needles. She looked up and saw William standing there, his fists clenched white, breath ragged. He looked like a child trapped in the body of a successful man, a man who had worn a mask of cold composure so long he had forgotten how to live honestly. Aaliyah folded the letter, laying it gently on the table. She didn't speak. Instead, she rose and stepped closer, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder, a small gesture, but waited. In that instant, his armor collapsed, his proud eyes reddened, and tears began to fall, heavy and silent. He didn't cry aloud, but each tear traced long paths. enough for Aaliyah to know this was the first time in years William had allowed himself to be weak. She offered no words of comfort, only stood beside him, her hands a quiet anchor. In the stillness, the ticking clock and his trembling breaths blended into a mournful but healing rhythm. Emily's portrait in the corner seemed to smile down on them. The children slept upstairs, but had they seen this, they might have understood that even a father who seemed untouchable still needed a hand to hold, still needed forgiveness. That late night, no words were spoken, yet silence itself became the answer. For the first time, William stepped out of the shadow of doubt and touched the rawness of his own pain. And sometimes, only by collapsing, can a person find the strength to rise again. Still, the question lingered. Would these tears mark a new beginning, or were they only a fleeting moment of weakness before the darkness returned stronger than ever? All right then, my dear audience. If you're watching and find this story moving, comment 1 or write "I'm still here" to keep listening. That afternoon, the Seattle sky turned gray before suddenly spilling into a brief shower. When the clouds parted, the garden behind the Carter mansion still glistened with moisture, the grass sparkling like glass. That was when Aaliyah had an idea. From the storage room, she brought out a roll of blue ribbon, tore it into strips, and patiently laid them across the lawn in a winding path like a maze. Each piece was anchored by small white stones, curving into arcs, leading to a final point beneath a maple tree. The triplets ran out curiously, eyes wide and round. They didn't yet know what the game was, but curiosity pulled them out of the silence that usually surrounded them. Aaliyah crouched low, signed "Let's go," and pointed to the ribbon path. The children giggled, stepping forward, each foot landing on the strip of bright blue. The air filled with excitement. Ethan bounced, trying to keep his balance on the thin ribbon as if he were walking a tightrope. Noah furrowed his brow, concentrating with the seriousness of someone on an important mission. Little Morgan stopped now and then to pick up a pebble, holding it to the sky like treasure just unearthed. Those tiny details made Aaliyah laugh, her voice blending with the soft breeze over the garden. From the porch, William stood with arms folded. He watched, caught between confusion and wonder. The mansion had been designed to showcase elegance. Trimmed gardens, straight walkways, a fountain at the center. Yet now, it was this playful chaos of ribbons that breathed life into the space. When the children reached the end of the path, Aaliyah signed something. The triplets turned as one toward the porch where William stood. Their small hands drew letters in the air, a D, followed by arms crossed to their chest. No words, but the message rang clear. "Come here, Dad." William froze. He was used to urgent calls from the board, to formal invitations from the financial elite. But this, for the first time in years, was a simple invitation, sent by the children who had long been silent as stone. His heart pounded. Part of him wanted to turn back, to retreat to the safety of distance. But their eyes, bright, expectant, pulled him past hesitation. He stepped off the porch, his leather shoes sinking into wet grass. The ribbons clung damply to his trousers, but he didn't care. Ethan burst into laughter when his father veered off the path, signing directions like a serious guide. Noah pressed his lips together, fighting a smile, while Morgan waved wildly, as though afraid if he didn't, his father would vanish. William laughed, a short, rough sound, but genuine. He reached the end of the path, and the children crashed into him all at once. A soft collision, yet strong enough to jolt his heart. Arms once steady on pens and deals worth millions now trembled as they wrapped around three small bodies. Their breath mingled, warm, carrying the scent of sun, grass, and childhood he thought he had lost forever. Aaliyah stood back, her smile tinged with quiet sadness but filled with warmth. She knew this moment wasn't hers, it belonged to a family reconnecting. William lifted his gaze and met hers. For an instant, he wasn't a cold millionaire, but simply a man trembling as he relearned how to be a father. The last light of day spilled over them, painting everything in gold like a curtain falling at the end of a performance. Yet in William's heart, this was no ending, it was a beginning. And he wondered, Would today's embrace be strong enough to hold when the next storm came? Or was it only a fleeting miracle in a rain-soaked garden? Aaliyah flung open the kitchen windows, letting the breeze carry in the scent of wet grass and new sunlight. The house, once dulled by silence, now felt like an instrument newly tuned, ready to play again. From the backyard came the soft pop-pop of soap bubbles. Morgan was blowing them into the air, each one glimmering before bursting into laughter. Ethan and Noah banged spoons against pots, hung on a rack, turning the kitchen into a makeshift orchestra. The sweet aroma of baking drifted down the hall, a warmth the mansion hadn't known since the day Emily was gone. William came down the stairs, this time not as a shadow weighed with silence, but as a father. His shirt was crisp as always, but a smile tugged at his lips before he could hide it. He stopped at the kitchen doorway, taking in the chaos. Flour smudged across Aaliyah's cheek, little handprints stamped across the wooden table. 3 children, crowding around a family drawing filled with crooked rainbows but brimming with life. A lump rose in his throat. For a moment, the invisible wall between him and his children seemed to dissolve. Aaliyah looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled. Without words, he understood. She had given back what he thought was gone forever. That afternoon, Aaliyah set up a small party in the garden. A plain white cloth draped across the long table, jars of wildflowers from the fence line, homemade cakes and lemonade. Nothing lavish, nothing perfect, but its simplicity made it real. The children ran wild, chasing bubbles, smearing dirt on their clothes. A sparrow swooped down to snatch a crumb, making Morgan laugh so hard he doubled over, while Ethan clapped as if cheering it on. William sat at the head of the table, his hand resting lightly on wood streaked with marker ink. His shoulders trembled, not from strain, but from emotion. When the children dragged their chairs close, pressing into his side, he let out a long breath, the kind that releases years of weight. "You've brought them back to me." His voice cracked, but every word rang true. Aaliyah bowed her head, her eyes shining though no tears fell. She didn't take his words as a triumph for herself, but as proof that Emily, gone too soon, could finally rest easy. By dusk, the garden glowed under strings of lights hastily hung around the maple tree. The triplets sat at the table, hands still smudged with color, but eyes shining. They were no longer shadows wandering a cold mansion. They were 3 souls rediscovering childhood. William, in the center, held them close not as a busy millionaire, but as a father finally given a second chance. Laughter rippled through the garden, mingling with the calls of night birds. The Carter home, once a fortress of silence, now pulsed like a living heart. Every smudge of paint, every burst bubble, every half-eaten cake stood as proof renewal had begun. Yet William wondered, could this fragile joy endure the storms ahead, or was it only the first chapter in a longer journey to keep love alive? And when the lights shimmered in the maple tree and laughter echoed through the garden, one might think the story had closed, that the Carter family had reclaimed their lost rhythm. But the truth was, this was only the beginning. Life never stands still. After warmth, challenges always come. William had shed his tears, wrapped his arms around his children, and taken the first step toward healing. But could a man who once thrived on power and the ruthless pace of business find the courage to protect something so tender? Aaliyah had brought light, but could that light withstand the storms ahead? And the triplets, would their rediscovered laughter become a lasting language, or remain flickering sparks in need of constant care? The story of the Carter family reminds us that sometimes what we believe is lost forever is only asleep, waiting for a patient hand to awaken it. Healing doesn't come from grand gestures, but from the smallest of moments. A soap bubble bursting, a streak of color across a wooden table, or a trembling embrace finally daring to hold tight. All of these fragments together form the miracle called love made present. If you're watching this video from anywhere across America, an apartment in New York, a warm home in Texas, or along the shores of California, ask yourself, how long has it been since you sat down, opened your heart, and let laughter return to your home? Share this story with your family and friends. Perhaps someone out there needs a small light to guide them through the dark. And don't forget to leave a comment below. What do you think awaits the Carter family in part 2? Will this flame keep burning bright? Or will a new storm rise to test them all? The story is still here, unfolding, and the journey of healing never truly ends.